Hey guys, tonight we're going to journey far away from our cozy beds. Down, down, down past the world you know, past the very roots of the mountains, to a desolate, dusty landscape where the air hangs heavy with an eternal, pointless struggle. Imagine standing at the base of a steep, craggy hill, its summit perpetually out of reach. And before you, a figure. He's broad-shouldered, eternally weary, sweat gleaming on his brow, as he strains against an immense, smooth boulder. With a grunt, he heaves it forward, inch by agonizing inch, up the unforgiving slope. This, my friends, is Sisyphus, and he's been pushing that rock, day in and day out, for millennia. You see, the myth of Sisyphus is one of the most famous, and frankly, most boring punishments in all of Greek mythology. It's an exercise in futility, a maddening cycle of effort and failure, repeated for all eternity. We're going to delve into the odd, twisting tale that led this poor, cursed soul to his endless torment. It's a story filled with trickery, defiance, and a very annoyed pantheon of gods. And by the end of it, you might just feel a little less frustrated by your own daily chores, because at least your laundry doesn't roll back down the hill right after you fold it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel, and it tells me you appreciate these little forays into the forgotten corners of ancient tales. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off to. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you watch Sisyphus strain, you start to wonder, what could he possibly have done to deserve this? What kind of cosmic crime warrants such a perfectly tailored, soul-crushing punishment? The sheer monotony of his task is almost hypnotic, drawing your gaze. The rhythmic scraping of the stone against the earth, a steady, comforting sound that lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. So, you've glimpsed Sisyphus at his eternal grind, the very embodiment of futility. But before we condemn him to this endless cycle, let's rewind time, back to the sun-drenched, bustling city of Corinth, and meet the man himself. You see, Sisyphus wasn't just some random fellow. He was the founding king of Corinth, a city that, under his reign, grew prosperous and powerful. And he achieved this not through brute strength or divine favor, but through an extraordinary, often infuriating, degree of cunning and deception. Imagine Sisyphus, not as a condemned figure, but as a vibrant, charismatic ruler. He was known throughout ancient Greece for his incredible intelligence, his sharp wit, and his unparalleled ability to outsmart nearly everyone he encountered. He was a master of intrigue, a political schemer who could twist words and situations to his advantage with remarkable ease. He could sweet-talk a god, swindle a neighbor, or maneuver a rival out of power, all with a twinkle in his eye. This wasn't necessarily evil, at least not at first. It was just Sisyphus being Sisyphus. He was just that good at getting his way. You can almost see the sly smile playing on his lips, the calculating glint in his eyes as he orchestrates some clever scheme. His resourcefulness extended to the very infrastructure of Corinth. One mainstream historical fact, woven into his myth, is that Sisyphus was credited with establishing the Isthmian Games, a major pan-Hellenic festival, second only to the Olympics, held every 2 years. This showcased his ability to blend civic ambition with religious reverence, creating something that would bring fame and wealth to his city. He was also said to have diverted a river to bring fresh water to Corinth, a truly monumental feat of engineering in the ancient world. This shows a practical, beneficial side to his cunning, a man who could use his wits for the good of his people. However, Sisyphus's cleverness often veered into outright deceit and a rather casual disregard for divine and mortal laws. He was notorious for his avarice, often resorting to dishonest means to increase his wealth and power. For example, a quirky or fringe tidbit is that he was rumored to have stolen the cattle of his neighbor, Autolycus, a son of Hermes and a master thief himself. Sisyphus, being Sisyphus, didn't just steal them, he marked their hooves with a special brand that allowed him to identify them, even if Autolycus tried to swap them out. When Autolycus came to confront him, Sisyphus slyly revealed the trick, proving his superior cunning even over a god's son. Historians still argue whether this particular cattle theft anecdote was an original part of the Sisyphus myth, or a later addition emphasizing his trickster nature. So, as you envision the shrewd, captivating king of Corinth, remember that his story is one of a man who constantly pushed boundaries, challenging authority with his intellect. His cleverness made him a great king, but it would ultimately be his downfall, setting him on a collision course with powers far greater than his own. You can almost hear the murmurs of awe and exasperation that followed his every move, a fascinating prelude to his eternal struggle, gently lulling you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. So, Sisyphus was the king of cunning, a man who consistently outwitted mortals. But what happens when you try to outsmart the very forces of nature, the fundamental laws of existence? That's precisely what Sisyphus did next, leading to his first, truly audacious act of defiance, tricking death. Imagine the sheer hubris, the unbelievable nerve. To believe you could actually bind an immortal entity, the very bringer of the end. The story goes that Zeus, king of the gods, had a bit of a problem. He was infatuated, as he often was, with Aegina, a daughter of the river god Sisyphus, as Zeus abducted her, a rather common occurrence in Greek myths. If you haven't noticed, Sisyphus was understandably furious and went searching for his daughter. Sisyphus, ever the opportunist and always eager to gain an advantage, happened to witness the abduction. He knew where Aegina was, and he knew Sisyphus wanted to find her. Now, instead of just telling Sisyphus, Sisyphus struck a bargain. He demanded that Sisyphus provide a permanent fresh water source for Corinth, his city. In exchange for the information, Sisyphus, desperate, agreed. Sisyphus then, with a smug grin, revealed Zeus's location. This act, betraying divine secrets, was a direct insult to Zeus, and, as you can imagine, Zeus was not pleased. This betrayal, a mainstream historical fact within the myth, shows Sisyphus's willingness to cross any boundary for personal or civic gain. Zeus, fuming, decided Sisyphus needed a taste of divine justice. He sent Thanatos, the personification of death itself, to drag Sisyphus to the underworld. Imagine Thanatos, a somber, unyielding figure, arriving at Sisyphus's palace, ready to claim his soul. But Sisyphus, ever the schemer, greeted him with feigned hospitality. He complimented Thanatos on his chains, admiring their craftsmanship. "Oh, mighty Thanatos," Sisyphus might have said. "Such beautiful craftsmanship. May I just inspect those magnificent chains? I've never seen their like." Thanatos, perhaps unaccustomed to such flattery or simply too confident in his own power, allowed Sisyphus to show him how the chains worked, and in a lightning-fast move, Sisyphus seized the opportunity and bound Thanatos himself. He managed to shackle death, rendering him utterly powerless. This was a quirky or fringe tidbit of the myth, showcasing Sisyphus's ability to turn the tables on even the most formidable opponents. The immediate consequence of binding death was absolute chaos on Earth. No one could die. Soldiers lingered on battlefields, horribly wounded but unable to pass on. The elderly suffered endless ailments without relief. Sacrifices to the gods of the underworld ceased. As no new souls arrived, it was a disruption of the natural order on a cosmic scale. a truly bizarre and unintended side effect of Sisyphus's cleverness. Historians still argue whether the binding of Thanatos in this myth was a unique event, or if echoes of it can be found in other ancient cultures' tales of mortality's disruption. So, as you picture the audacious Sisyphus, a mere mortal, holding death itself captive, remember his incredible cunning and his disregard for the cosmic order. This daring act set the stage for much greater divine retribution, but for a brief, bewildering time. Sisyphus had effectively made himself immortal. You can almost hear the bewildered cries from mortals and gods alike. A fascinating prelude to his much grander punishment, gently lulling you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. So, Sisyphus had effectively broken the universe. With Thanatos bound, no one could die, and the natural order of life and death, so crucial to the cosmos, was thrown into utter disarray. Imagine the absolute chaos, battlefields littered with undying warriors, hospitals overflowing with eternally suffering patients, and the gods of the underworld, notably Hades and his queen Persephone, growing increasingly agitated by the sudden lack of new arrivals. This bizarre situation couldn't last, and the divine powers were certainly not going to let a mere mortal like Sisyphus get away with it. News of Death's captivity quickly reached Mount Olympus, sparking outrage among the gods. Zeus, still fuming over Sisyphus's betrayal regarding Aegina, was particularly incensed. This wasn't just an insult, it was a fundamental disruption of his cosmic order. Someone had to put this cheeky mortal back in his place. The gods couldn't simply ignore it, their very authority was being challenged. Enter Ares, the hot-headed god of war. Now, Ares had a very vested interest in this whole no one can die situation. Think about it, what's the point of glorious battle if no one actually dies? His entire domain was being undermined, he was probably pacing Olympus, tearing his hair out, muttering about the indignity of it all. This urgent need for the return of death in battle is a mainstream historical fact in Greek mythology, often showing Ares' direct, violent approach to problems. So, Zeus, probably with a knowing smirk, dispatched Ares to resolve the issue. Imagine Ares, clad in his gleaming armor, his eyes burning with martial fury, descending from Olympus to Sisyphus's palace. He wasn't there for a polite chat. He was there to free Thanatos, and he did so with the brutal efficiency you'd expect from the god of war. Ares quickly overpowered Sisyphus, probably with a single, swift blow, and released Thanatos from his shackles. You can almost feel the chilling presence of death, now free, filling the room. A sudden, cold dread replacing the false sense of immortality Sisyphus had conjured. Once free, Thanatos wasted no time. His first order of business, under Zeus's direct command, was to drag Sisyphus to the underworld. This was the immediate, divine retribution for his audacious act. Sisyphus, who had briefly triumphed over death, now found himself powerless before him. He was violently seized, stripped of his earthly life, and forced into the gloomy realm of Hades. It was a swift, unavoidable descent, a stark reminder that even the cleverest mortal cannot ultimately escape their fate. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Thanatos' release wasn't just about restoring order. Some myths suggest a subtle sense of indignation from death himself, having been so personally humiliated by a mortal, perhaps fueling his desire for Sisyphus's swift dispatch. Historians still argue whether Ares' involvement was a primary or secondary element in earlier versions of the myth, or if other gods sometimes played the role of Thanatos' liberator. So, as you picture the swift, righteous fury of Ares and the inevitable descent of Sisyphus into the shadowy realm of the dead, remember that this was just the first time Sisyphus tried to cheat death, and as you'll soon discover, it certainly wouldn't be the last. You can almost hear the heavy, dragging footsteps of Thanatos, pulling Sisyphus deeper into the earth, a solemn rhythm that gently lulls you into a calm, dream-filled slumber. So, Sisyphus found himself in the underworld, finally caught by Thanatos and delivered to Hades. Most mortals, upon arriving in the gloomy realm of the dead, would simply accept their fate, perhaps lament a bit, and then settle into their eternal rest. But Sisyphus was not most mortals. His cunning knew no bounds, and even in the face of absolute finality, he had one more trick up his sleeve, orchestrating a truly audacious escape from Hades. Imagine Sisyphus, standing before the thrones of Hades and Persephone, the formidable king and queen of the underworld. Hades, stern and unyielding, would have been ready to assign him to his eternal dwelling. But Sisyphus, ever the actor, feigned confusion and indignation. He claimed that his presence there was unjust, that he had been brought down unfairly. This was his crucial, desperate play for time. His argument centered on a clever prearranged instruction he had given to his wife, Merope, before Thanatos had taken him. Sisyphus had explicitly forbidden her from performing the customary funeral rites. This meant no proper burial, no coins placed under his tongue for Charon the ferryman, no libations poured. This was a direct, blasphemous violation of ancient Greek religious custom. For the Greeks, proper burial rites were absolutely crucial for a soul to find peace in the afterlife. Without them, the soul would wander eternally restless. This insistence on proper burial, a mainstream historical fact in Greek beliefs, shows Sisyphus exploiting a deeply held cultural norm. Sisyphus, standing before Hades and Persephone, complained bitterly that his wife had neglected her duties. He argued that he, as a result, was an unburied, unhallowed soul, wrongfully adrift in the underworld, unable to properly cross into the afterlife. He appealed to Persephone, the queen, perhaps seeing her as more compassionate than her grim husband. He implored her to allow him to return to the mortal world for just a short while, merely to scold his wife for her negligence and ensure the proper funeral rites were performed. He promised, with all the sincerity a trickster could muster, that he would return to the underworld immediately afterward. You can almost hear the practiced sincerity in his voice, dripping with feigned piety. "O noble Queen Persephone, my very soul is tormented by this disrespect. Just let me pop back for a quick word with the missus. Now, why would Hades and Persephone fall for this? Well, a quirky or fringe tidbit is that the gods, for all their power, were sticklers for divine law and cosmic order. The proper performance of funeral rites was paramount, even for the rulers of the underworld. An unburied soul was a disruption, even if Sisyphus himself was the cause of it. Perhaps Persephone, feeling a pang of pity or simply agreeing that the ritual purity of the dead should be upheld, persuaded Hades, or perhaps Hades, tired of the nagging, simply thought, "Fine, go get your burial, then you're really mine." Historians still argue whether Persephone was genuinely tricked by Sisyphus, or if she secretly admired his cunning and defiance, leading her to advocate for his temporary release. So, Sisyphus, the man who had tricked death, now tricked the rulers of the dead themselves. He was granted permission to return to the mortal world, a temporary reprieve from eternal judgment, all thanks to his audacious plan. This was an almost unbelievable feat of manipulation, showcasing his unparalleled wit even in the gravest of circumstances. You can almost feel the fleeting relief as he slips past the grim gate of the underworld. A temporary victory that would, however, soon lead to far greater wrath. This second escape, perhaps even more audacious than the first, gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. You've watched Sisyphus outwit death and even manipulate the rulers of the underworld. Now, imagine him back among the living, Having escaped the grim clutches of Hades, most people, given a second chance at life, especially after such a brush with cosmic forces, might live humbly, perhaps devote themselves to piety, or at least avoid annoying the gods. But not Sisyphus. He returned to Corinth and promptly went back to what he did best, living large and ignoring the gods. Upon his return, Sisyphus was probably met with astonishment. His wife, Merope, must have been bewildered, perhaps even a little annoyed, that her supposedly dead husband was suddenly back. Not to mention his bizarre instructions about the funeral rites. But Sisyphus likely brushed aside any concerns. Perhaps with a charming lie or a cunning explanation, he quickly re-established himself as king of Corinth, throwing himself back into his life of power, wealth, and pleasure. You can almost see him, lounging on a luxurious couch, sipping wine, completely unbothered by the divine wrath he had so narrowly escaped. Oh, the underworld bit of a bore. Really. Glad to be back where the real fun is. He didn't just return, he reveled in his renewed mortality. He likely ignored the promise he made to Persephone to return to the underworld. Why go back to that dreary place when you could be enjoying the warm Mediterranean sun, the taste of fine Corinthian wine, and the adulation of your subjects, this blatant disregard for his sacred promise? His hubris in defying the natural order twice cemented his fate in the eyes of the Olympians, his continued existence in the mortal realm. A soul that should have been long gone was a constant, irritating reminder of his unparalleled cleverness and their temporary humiliation. This period of Sisyphus's prolonged earthly life, after his escape, is a mainstream historical fact within the myth, serving as the crucial bridge to his ultimate eternal punishment. It highlights his incorrigible nature, his inability to learn a lesson, and his profound arrogance. He believed he was above the rules, even those set by the most powerful beings in the cosmos. A quirky or fringe tidbit from some interpretations suggests that Sisyphus's continued life was not just about pleasure, but also about a deep-seated fear of death itself. Having experienced the underworld, he was perhaps more desperate than ever to cling to mortal life, pushing his cleverness to extreme lengths to avoid the inevitable. This might explain his utter refusal to return, turning his defiance into a form of desperate survival. Historians still argue whether Sisyphus's prolonged second life was short and frantic, or if he genuinely lived for many years, enjoying his cosmic loophole before the gods finally intervened again. So, as you picture Sisyphus living it up in Corinth, reveling in his defiance, remember that every extra day he spent among the living was adding fuel to the gods' simmering rage. His joy was fleeting, his freedom an illusion, and the clock was ticking down to a punishment far more ingenious and far more eternal than anything he could possibly imagine. You can almost hear the faint, ominous ticking, a subtle warning of the cosmic hammer about to fall, gently lulling you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. Sisyphus, having brazenly returned to his life of luxury and defiance, was living on borrowed time. The gods, particularly Zeus, were not amused. They had allowed Thanatos to be briefly bound and Hades to be momentarily outwitted. But Sisyphus's continued existence among mortals was an unbearable affront to their divine authority. He had defied the very natural order not once, but twice, and a simple retrieval by Thanatos again would not suffice. This time, the messenger sent would be one of incredible swiftness and unwavering resolve. Hermes. Imagine the scene: Sisyphus, perhaps enjoying a lavish banquet in his Corinthian palace, perhaps boasting to his courtiers about his clever escape from the underworld, when a shimmering figure descends from the heavens. This isn't the grim, silent approach of Thanatos. This is the graceful, albeit terrifying, arrival of Hermes, clad in his winged sandals and cap, carrying his caduceus. Hermes is the messenger of the gods, known for his speed, his wit, and his absolute loyalty to Zeus. When Hermes comes for you, there's no arguing, no bargaining, and certainly no tricking your way out of it. You can almost feel the sudden chill in the air, the collective silence falling over the bustling palace as the divine messenger makes his presence known. Well, well, King Sisyphus, Hermes might have said, his voice deceptively calm. It seems you've overstayed your welcome. Hermes' mission was clear and non-negotiable to retrieve Sisyphus definitively. There would be no chains to admire, no appeals to Persephone, no clever escape routes. Hermes was a master of strategy, a god known for his own cunning, but always in service to the Olympians. He wasn't susceptible to Sisyphus's wiles. This was a mainstream historical fact in the myth, marking the point where the gods truly lost their patience and sent an executor who could not be fooled. The encounter was swift. Sisyphus, for all his earthly cleverness, was a mere mortal against a god, Hermes, without ceremony or much dialogue. Seized Sisyphus. Perhaps he simply touched him with the caduceus, stripping away his life force instantly. Or perhaps he merely grabbed him with divine strength and pulled him away. There was no struggle, no last-ditch effort to escape. Sisyphus's game was definitively over. He was dragged. Not gently, but with the irresistible force of divine will, back towards the underworld. A quirky or fringe tidbit from some retelling suggests that Sisyphus might have tried one last, desperate plea, attempting to bargain with Hermes, perhaps offering him all the riches of Corinth. But Hermes, ever focused on his divine duty, would have been impervious to such earthly temptations. He had a job to do, and Sisyphus was finally going to face his permanent punishment. Historians still argue whether Hermes' role here was a simple escort, or if he also delivered a specific, chilling message from Zeus regarding Sisyphus's impending doom. So, as you picture the inevitable capture of Sisyphus by the swift and unwavering Hermes, remember that even the cleverest mortal eventually runs out of tricks when dealing with truly omnipotent powers. His defiance had reached its limit, and the time for ultimate retribution had come. You can almost hear the faint, whooshing sound of Hermes' winged sandals carrying Sisyphus away, a solemn rhythm that gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. Sisyphus, now firmly in the grasp of Hermes, was irrevocably heading back to the underworld. But this time, his fate wouldn't be left to the immediate judgment of Hades alone. His repeated, audacious defiance of divine authority, particularly his insult to Zeus regarding Aegina and his unprecedented escapes from Thanatos and Hades himself, demanded a higher court. This time, his ultimate punishment would be determined by the collective wisdom and collective outrage of the Olympian pantheon. Imagine the scene, not of a courtroom, but of a vast, ethereal assembly on Mount Olympus, where the most powerful beings in the cosmos gathered to pass judgment. You see, the gods were not just powerful, they were also deeply concerned with maintaining cosmic order and their own supremacy. Sisyphus had directly challenged both. His actions had demonstrated that a mere mortal could, through cunning, seemingly circumvent the laws of life and death, and even embarrass the gods. This set a dangerous precedent. If Sisyphus got away with it, what would stop other mortals from attempting similar feats of deception? The very structure of the universe, with gods at the top and mortals below, was implicitly threatened. This was a mainstream historical fact in Greek mythology, where gods often acted in concert to uphold divine law. Imagine Zeus, seated on his grand throne, probably still radiating thunderous annoyance. Beside him, Hera, ever watchful and often unforgiving. Apollo, Athena, Poseidon, Demeter, and all the major Olympians would have been present, their expressions ranging from stern disapproval to grim fascination. Hades, perhaps, would have been there too. eager to finally receive his troublesome prisoner for good. They would discuss Sisyphus's various transgressions, his betrayal of Zeus, his binding of Thanatos, his trickery of Persephone, and his blatant disregard for his promise to return. Each act, on its own, was significant. Together, they formed a pattern of unforgivable insolence. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the gods often held these grand councils not just for major judgments, but for seemingly trivial disputes as well, showcasing their capricious nature. However, Sisyphus's case was undoubtedly one of the gravest, demanding the full attention of the pantheon. The debate among them, if there was one, would have centered not on whether he deserved punishment that was a given, but what kind of punishment would be most fitting, one that would serve as a powerful deterrent to any future mortal who dared to challenge their authority. Historians still argue whether the specific form of Sisyphus's punishment was a direct invention of the Olympian gods, or if it drew upon older, pre-Olympian concepts of eternal torment. The consensus was clear: Sisyphus needed a punishment that was not only eternal but also perfectly tailored to his particular brand of cunning and defiance. It couldn't be a quick death, for he had already defied death. It couldn't be a temporary imprisonment, for he had escaped that. It had to be something that would utterly break his spirit, rendering his cleverness meaningless and his ambition futile. This was the moment of divine judgment, where the Olympians, in their infinite power and often ironic wisdom, devised a torment that would echo through millennia as a symbol of pointless labor. You can almost feel the weight of their collective decision, a heavy, unavoidable decree that would forever define Sisyphus's existence. This grand council, determining the fate of one incredibly annoying mortal, gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. So, the Olympian gods, having convened their grand council, had decided Sisyphus's fate. They needed a punishment that was not only eternal but also uniquely suited to his character, a torment that would nullify his cunning and endless ambition. They devised something far more insidious than simple torture, a task that was physically grueling. Yes, but primarily soul-crushing in its utter futility. This is the moment when the eternal rock's origin is revealed, and you finally understand the peculiar cruelty of his sentence. Imagine the underworld, not as a fiery abyss, but as a barren, ascending landscape, leading to a precipitous peak. Sisyphus, having been delivered by Hermes, was brought to this very spot. Zeus, or perhaps Hades himself delivering the decree, pronounced the judgment Sisyphus was to push a colossal boulder up a steep hill. A simple enough task, one might think, if it weren't for the insidious twist, just as the boulder reached the very summit. Teetering on the edge of success, it would, by divine decree, always, inevitably, roll back down to the bottom, and Sisyphus would have to start all over again. This wasn't about brute force alone, it was about the symbolism of the punishment. The rock itself was not just heavy, it was a representation of Sisyphus's ambition, his desire to conquer, to reach the top. But in this eternal loop, his ambition was forever thwarted. He would never achieve his goal. The punishment was perfectly designed to break the spirit of a man who prided himself on his cleverness and his ability to achieve whatever he set his mind to. It was an intellectual torture, a psychological torment, far more profound than mere physical pain. This mainstream historical fact about the nature of his punishment is what has made Sisyphus a lasting symbol of existential futility. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the weight and size of the rock are often described as just slightly beyond what a single man could manage easily. Ensuring maximum exertion without ever offering a moment of true rest, it's heavy enough to require all his strength, but not so heavy that he instantly collapses, trapping him in a state of perpetual struggle just below the threshold of absolute despair. Historians still argue whether the specific dimensions of the hill and rock were meticulously calculated by the gods, or if the myth evolved to represent a universal sense of an unattainable goal, the origin of the eternal rock. Therefore, wasn't just a random act of divine anger, it was a carefully crafted psychological weapon, designed to crush the very essence of Sisyphus's being. It symbolized the futility of human defiance against immortal power, the inescapable nature of one's fate when the gods decide. It was a punishment that promised an eternity of effort. Without the sweet release of completion or success, you can almost feel the smooth, unyielding surface of the stone. The strain in your muscles as you imagine the start of that endless climb. A heavy rhythm that gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. Now that you understand the origins of Sisyphus's unique torment, let's truly descend into the monotonous, agonizing reality of his punishment. Imagine him there, at the base of that relentless hill, the immense boulder looming before him. This isn't just a heavy rock, it's the weight of endless futility, a physical manifestation of his defiance and the gods' unyielding will. This is the heart of his eternal suffering, the hill, the summit, the rollback. You begin, as Sisyphus does. At the bottom, the rock is cold, rough, and stubbornly heavy. You brace yourself, your muscles straining, pushing with all your might. The initial ascent is the hardest. Each step upwards is a battle against gravity, against the sheer inertia of the stone. You lean into it, your shoulders burning, your legs aching with every slow, deliberate movement. The path is probably uneven, strewn with loose stones, making every foot placement a calculated risk. The sun, if there is one in the underworld, might beat down relentlessly, or perhaps the air is perpetually chill and damp. Adding to the grim misery, there's no respite, no shade, just the unwavering slope stretching upwards. You can almost feel the grit of the rock beneath your palms, the raw effort required to move it, as you ascend, inch by agonizing inch. The slope steepens, the air thins, or perhaps it's just the exhaustion making it harder to breathe. You might find a momentary rhythm, a slow, deliberate cadence of push and step. Push and step. You focus on the summit, that elusive peak, the temporary goal that promises a fleeting moment of success before the inevitable. It's a trick of the mind, a flicker of hope that keeps the tormented soul moving. You're constantly calculating, constantly battling, pushing, pushing, pushing. This relentless, unending physical exertion is a mainstream historical fact of his punishment, universally depicted in literature and art. But then, the cruel climax. You reach the very crest. The boulder teeters, momentarily balanced at the pinnacle. For a fleeting second, there's a gasp of effort, a moment where it seems possible. Perhaps Sisyphus allows himself a single, shallow breath of triumph, and then, without fail, the divine curse reasserts itself. The rock, with a low rumble that grows into a terrifying roar, begins its descent. It slips, then slides, then tumbles, gaining momentum as it crashes back down the hill, inevitably coming to rest precisely where Sisyphus started. It's a perfectly orchestrated cosmic undo button, resetting his suffering with cruel precision. You can almost hear the echoing crash of the rock as it rolls back down, a sound that promises no end to his misery. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in some interpretations, the gods cursed the rock itself, rather than Sisyphus directly, imbuing it with a magical property that compelled it to always return to the bottom. This shifts the focus from Sisyphus's inherent weakness to an external, inescapable force, emphasizing the overwhelming power of divine decree. Historians still argue whether the exact nature of the rollback, e.g., whether it was truly magical or simply an exaggerated depiction of Sisyphus's physical exhaustion, was consistently portrayed across ancient Greek sources. So, As you envision this eternal, repetitive cycle of effort and futility, the climb and the inevitable rollback, remember the ingenious cruelty of his punishment. It perfectly captures the essence of a task that is never truly finished, a goal forever just out of reach. This monotonous torment, an endless loop of despair, gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. As you reflect on the soul-crushing monotony of Sisyphus's eternal task, pushing that rock endlessly uphill only for it to roll back down, you begin to grasp its deeper meaning. This isn't just a story about a stubborn king and angry gods, it's a powerful symbolism of the absurd. Imagine contemplating the vast, indifferent universe and humanity's seemingly futile efforts within it. The myth of Sisyphus forces you to confront profound questions about existence, purpose, and the very nature of happiness. The term absurd here doesn't mean ridiculous or silly. Instead, it refers to the inherent conflict between humanity's desperate search for meaning and purpose in life, and the cold, silent indifference of the universe. You crave order, understanding, and ultimate significance, but the cosmos offers none. Sisyphus, tirelessly pushing his rock, perfectly embodies the struggle. His task has no ultimate goal. It creates nothing, achieves nothing, and forever remains incomplete. It is a symbol of a life lived without inherent meaning or transcendent purpose. So you wake up, do the thing, then it undoes itself, and you do it again. Sounds like Tuesday, actually. This concept of the absurd was famously explored by the 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus. For Camus, Sisyphus was not a tragic hero, but an absurd hero. He acknowledged the grim reality of Sisyphus's fate, the useless and hopeless toil. However, Camus argued that the true heroism lies in Sisyphus's consciousness of his situation. He knows his task is meaningless, yet he continues. It is in this very awareness, this conscious acceptance of his fate without succumbing to despair, that Sisyphus finds his dignity. The moment he acknowledges the absurdity, he transcends it. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some interpretations suggest the punishment of Sisyphus wasn't merely physical, but involved a divine enchantment that prevented him from ever forgetting the futility of his task. Unlike a beast of burden, he retains full consciousness of his torment, making the psychological anguish perhaps even greater than the physical strain. Historians still argue whether the Greek audience would have understood Sisyphus's punishment in such an existential philosophical light, or if their focus was more on the consequence of defying the gods. So, as you ponder the profound symbolism of the absurd woven into Sisyphus's story, recognize that his endless struggle is not just a divine punishment, but a mirror reflecting our own universal quest for meaning in a seemingly indifferent world. It's a powerful, albeit heavy, concept that gently lulls you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber, contemplating the quiet dignity of persistence. You've absorbed the philosophical weight of Sisyphus's eternal struggle, seeing it as a symbol of the absurd. But let's not forget the man himself. Sisyphus wasn't just a passive victim of fate, he was, in his own way, a rebel. Imagine a single mortal, repeatedly and defiantly, challenging the ultimate authority of the gods, daring to believe he could outwit destiny itself. His punishment, therefore, is not just about the gods' anger, but about their desperate need to crush such insolence. Sisyphus's entire myth is a testament to his profound defiance against divine authority and mortality. From his betrayal of Zeus to his binding of Thanatos, and his audacious escape from Hades, Sisyphus continuously rejected the natural order. He refused to accept his place as a mere mortal. He believed his cleverness, his metis, a Greek term for cunning intelligence, was superior to divine power, or at least capable of circumventing it. This wasn't a hero fighting for justice or freedom. It was a rogue, a trickster, consistently pushing the boundaries of what was permissible. He simply refused to stay dead. Which, let's be honest, is a pretty serious breach of cosmic etiquette. "You can't make me die if I don't want to," was practically his catchphrase. His rebellion was not one of physical might, but of intellect and stubborn will. He faced gods with powers unimaginable to mortals. Yet he never truly submitted, even as he pushes the rock. The very act of doing so, knowing its futility, can be seen as an act of quiet defiance. He's not screaming, not begging for mercy. He's doing it because he's forced to, but without breaking his spirit. This persistent, unyielding nature in the face of inevitable defeat is a mainstream historical fact that makes Sisyphus a fascinating, if sometimes exasperating, figure in Greek mythology. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some interpretations of Sisyphus's character suggest he might have viewed his punishment not just as a torment, but as a twisted kind of continued existence. By constantly striving, constantly acting, even futilely, he avoids the true oblivion or passive state of the dead. His rebellion ensures he is active, even if his activity is pointless. This makes his punishment a reflection of his own nature, eternally striving. Historians still argue whether Sisyphus's defiance was seen by ancient Greeks as admirable, or solely as a lesson in the dangers of hubris. So, as you ponder Sisyphus, the perpetual rock pusher, consider him not just as a victim, but as a symbol of humanity's innate, sometimes foolish, desire to defy limits. His story is a powerful exploration of rebellion, resilience, and the eternal struggle against forces greater than ourselves. It's a testament to the unyielding human spirit, even when facing a truly absurd fate, gently lulling you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. You've delved into Sisyphus's defiance, understanding that his eternal struggle is a cosmic consequence of his indomitable will. Now, let's fast forward from ancient myths to our modern lives. The image of Sisyphus, tirelessly pushing his rock, resonates surprisingly powerfully in the contemporary world. You might not be pushing a literal boulder up a hill, but you've almost certainly encountered the modern echoes of Sisyphus in your own existence. Think about it: how many tasks in your daily life feel like Sisyphus's rock? The email inbox that refills faster than you can empty it, the never-ending pile of laundry that seems to multiply overnight, the constantly reappearing dishes in the sink. Or perhaps it's the treadmill at the gym, where you expend immense energy but never actually move forward. These are all small, mundane Sisyphean tasks. They are necessary, perhaps, but they often lack a sense of ultimate completion, returning to their starting point just as you think you've conquered them. Just when you think you're done, the universe sends more. It's like a cosmic subscription service you can't cancel, beyond the domestic chores. The metaphor extends to many aspects of modern work life. Imagine working on a long-term project, only to have its goals constantly shifted, its parameters changed, or its progress undone by external factors. Or perhaps you're in a job where your efforts feel perpetually unacknowledged, your achievements quickly forgotten as the next urgent task arises. This sense of pointless labor, of expending energy without a lasting, tangible outcome, is a very real source of frustration and burnout in today's society. The myth provides a framework for understanding that feeling. A mainstream historical fact is that the Industrial Revolution, with its emphasis on repetitive, assembly line tasks, inadvertently created millions of Sisyphean jobs, where workers perform the same motion countless times, often without seeing the finished product. This dehumanizing aspect of labor has long been a source of philosophical and social commentary, making Sisyphus's plight strikingly relevant. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some modern psychological interpretations suggest that our brains are inherently wired to seek completion and reward. When we engage in Sisyphean tasks, the lack of a definitive end or a clear reward can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction and even anxiety. It's why breaking down large tasks into smaller, achievable steps, even if the overall task is ongoing, can be so crucial for maintaining morale. Historians still argue whether the concept of meaningless labor in ancient societies carried the same psychological weight as it does in modern industrial and post-industrial contexts. So, as you reflect on the modern echoes of Sisyphus, recognize that his ancient punishment holds a mirror to many of our own daily struggles. It's a reminder that even in progress-driven societies, the feeling of repetitive, unfulfilling labor is a universal human experience. It's a concept that resonates deeply, gently lulling you into a calm, dream-filled slumber, contemplating the cycles of effort in your own life. You've seen the Sisyphean struggle reflected in your own life. But let's return to the source, to the ancient Greek myth itself. What profound insights can we glean from this tale of endless toil, the story of Sisyphus? For all its repetitive misery, offers powerful moral lessons about human nature, the dangers of hubris, and the inescapable nature of fate. One of the primary lessons is a cautionary tale against hubris, or excessive pride and arrogance. Sisyphus, in his unparalleled cunning, truly believed he could outwit the gods, escape death, and defy the cosmic order. He repeatedly pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable for a mortal, not out of any noble cause, but often for personal gain, a longer life, or just the sheer satisfaction of being the smartest guy in the room. His punishment serves as a stark warning: no mortal, no matter how clever, can ultimately circumvent the will of the gods or the fundamental laws of existence. The universe, in its vast indifference, has a way of putting everyone in their place. And Sisyphus's place was a very steep hill. You thought you were hot stuff? Try pushing this rock for a few millennia, then we'll talk. Another crucial lesson lies in the concept of fate and divine justice. In Greek mythology, mortals often struggled against their preordained destinies, but the gods ultimately held the cards. Sisyphus's cleverness merely prolonged his inevitable doom, and, in fact, made his final punishment far more creatively excruciating. It teaches that while human ingenuity can achieve remarkable feats, there are certain boundaries that cannot be crossed. The gods, as arbiters of justice and order, ensure that transgressions are met with fitting retribution, often with a poetic irony tailored to the nature of the crime. His punishment wasn't just about pain, it was about nullifying the very essence of his being, his cunning. A mainstream historical fact is that Greek mythology often emphasized the importance of arete virtue or excellence, and the dangers of blind folly or delusion often brought on by hubris. Sisyphus's story perfectly illustrates this moral framework, showcasing how exceptional talent, when coupled with excessive pride, leads to ruin. A quirky or fringe tidbit from some interpretations suggests that the gods didn't just punish Sisyphus for his defiance, but also for his betrayal of confidences and his general disrespect for the sanctity of life and death, even going so far as to expose divine secrets. This broadens the scope of his transgression beyond mere cleverness to a more profound moral failing. Historians still argue whether the primary lesson of Sisyphus's myth was intended to be a warning against specific actions like tricking death, or a more general philosophical statement about the human condition and mortality. So, as you ponder the moral lessons embedded within the tireless struggle of Sisyphus, remember that his story is more than just a punishment. It's a timeless reflection on the human spirit's ambition, its flaws, and its ultimate place within the grand, indifferent scheme of the cosmos. It's a profound thought to drift on, gently lulling you deeper into a calm, dream-filled slumber. You've journeyed through the myth of Sisyphus, from his cunning life to his cosmic punishment, and even seen his echoes in your own daily tasks. But perhaps the most profound, and ironically, comforting lesson from Sisyphus comes from looking beyond the surface of his torment. towards the idea of acceptance and meaning. Imagine confronting the very definition of futility, yet finding a defiant form of joy within it. This brings us back to the philosopher Albert Camus and his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. For Camus, the true heroism of Sisyphus lies not in escaping his fate, which is impossible, but in his consciousness. Sisyphus knows his task is absurd. He knows the rock will always roll back down. Yet, in that knowledge, he gains a peculiar kind of freedom. He is no longer deceived by false hopes or illusions of a grander purpose. He faces the harsh reality of his situation head on. As he walks back down the hill after the rock's inevitable descent, he has a moment of reflection, a brief reprieve where he is superior to his fate because he knows it. This moment, for Camus, is where true meaning can be forged. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Camus wrote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This isn't about enjoying the physical labor. Of course, it's about a mental triumph. It's about finding meaning in the absurd struggle, not despite it. But because of it, if life itself is inherently without external meaning, then the meaning must be created from within, through conscious rebellion against that meaninglessness. Sisyphus's perpetual effort becomes his purpose, his defiance of the gods. His stubborn insistence on continuing transforms his punishment into his victory. He refuses to be broken by despair. He embodies the idea that even in the most repetitive or seemingly futile tasks, we can find a sense of purpose simply by choosing to engage, by choosing to be present, by choosing to resist the urge to give up. A mainstream historical fact of Camus' philosophy is that he was a key figure in existentialism and the philosophy of the absurd, prompting generations to reconsider fundamental questions about life, meaning, and human freedom. His interpretation of Sisyphus remains one of the most influential readings of the myth. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that while most depictions of Sisyphus focus on his suffering, Camus' interpretation subtly shifts the narrative, turning the punishment into a paradoxical source of strength. It suggests that happiness isn't about achieving a final goal, but about the very act of striving, the journey itself. Historians still argue whether Camus' optimistic spin on Sisyphus truly aligns with the ancient Greek understanding of divine punishment, or if it represents a distinctly modern philosophical reevaluation. So, as the echoes of Sisyphus's rolling rock fade into the vast silence of the underworld, allow yourself to contemplate the profound idea that even in the most seemingly pointless struggles, meaning can be found through acceptance, defiance, and conscious engagement. Your mind is calm, your body relaxed. There's nothing left to do now but to breathe, to simply be, and to let the peacefulness of this moment embrace you fully. Each breath in, a gentle sigh of contentment. Each breath out, a release of any lingering thought. The odd reason why Sisyphus keeps pushing that rock has been unveiled. And now, it's time for you to drift into a deep, restorative sleep. Sweet dreams.